Hey everyone, Matt here with Nightrun Studio, and welcome back to another enemy AI video. We've now got our enemy able to detect the player and charge him, but he's not able to deal any damage, which is what we're going to be ready to do next. That said, before we can get there, I want to do a little bit of work cleaning up our enemy. If you take a look in our enemy class, you'll notice that we're starting to get quite a few stats stacking up, which are just filling up this script and making it really busy. I want to separate these out into a scriptable object. Now, you don't have to do this. You could set this up in a prefab where just every prefab of the enemy can have whatever stats you want to have. However, putting them in a scriptable object, first of all, will keep this script cleaner. It's already getting pretty long, and as our enemy gets more and more complex, these stats are going to spread out. Additionally, I'm trying to keep in mind the single responsibility principle, which will keep our code cleaner, more modular, and while I don't follow it doggedly, is something I want to move towards in this series. So let's make this happen. First thing we're going to do is just in our scripts folder, we're going to create a brand new C# script, which we're just going to call stats so for scriptable object. Now, because this is a scriptable object, not a mono behavior, we're going to inherit from scriptable object. And we're going to get rid of start and update, as a scriptable object is really just a data container, and it doesn't have start and update functions, as it won't actually be in the game per se like a mono behavior, but something that's accessed from within the game. Let's pop over into our enemy script, and we're actually going to take almost all of these stats here and move them. The only one I want to leave is our state time. Remember, that keeps track of the time when we enter a state, and it makes sense for that to remain here as it's a stat that will be constantly changed. However, these other stats are more static. One thing I want to do though before we go is this raycast distance is a little bit ambiguous. It's easy to forget what that means. This is actually being used in our ground check to see if we've reached a cliff. So rather than call it raycast distance, let's Command R so that we can rename it in all places it shows up. Let's call this one cliff check distance. Now, before we go writing this script, just as a quick note, you might want to look at your enemy script and just record the different stats you've put into these boxes, as once we move them into a scriptable object, we'll lose those values and you might not be able to remember what you set them at. All right, I'm just going to literally cut these out, and that's going to create all kinds of errors, but we'll figure that out later. In our stats SO now, we can paste all of these back in, and I'm just going to create a little bit of organization by adding some headers. We'll call this first one player detection. We'll make another for the charge state. And finally, we'll add one more for our patrol state. Now we're going to separate out these different checks here, so we'll put one in each. So the cliff check distance is part of our patrol state, as is obstacle distance. And player detect distance goes right down here. Player detection time is part of our player detect, as is detected wait time. And we have our charge time and charge speed down here. All right, while we're here, I am just going to uninitialize this, giving it no value, because we'll set all the values in the inspector. Now, additionally, we want to be able to actually create these scriptable objects in Unity. So let's go create asset menu. Menu name is equal to SO. At this point now we can pop back into enemy, and instead of putting all of those stats, we can just make a public stats SO reference, and let's just call this one stats. Now if we save that and pop into Unity, you can see in the console that we are bombarded with errors. I'm just going to click on the first of these. All right, and what you'll notice here is that we now need to add the stats reference in front of each of these lines. I'm going to pop into enemy, as that's actually one of the spots where many of these errors will be showing up, and we can just add stats in front of each of these. We've now eliminated most of the problems. We can just follow these last couple. I see that I've got one for charge time and for charge speed down here as well. Almost there. Looks like our patrol state has the final two. And it looks like it's for our speed. Right, with that done, we can head back to Unity. Right, now we are going to continue to get this error here. It's our onDraw Gizmos one. And essentially what's just happening here is it can't find player detect distance because it only accesses stats after the game begins, and so it won't work. So I'm actually going to remove this altogether, as we no longer need it now that our ledge detector is working. That said, if you really like having the line to show where he's detecting, you could just replace this with the same value that you are going to put into your scriptable object, which in my case is a 5. So I could put that there, it would continue to work. The only thing is if I change it in my scriptable object, I'd have to come in and change it here as well. And so I'm actually just going to remove this for now. All right, so now let's create that scriptable object. So in our project folder here, I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call this one enemy stats. We can go in there and go to create. And up top here now, you should have a new one called stats SO. And that will just create our scriptable object. I'm going to name this one after my robot. He's a CRT robot. And over on the right here, we can put in our stats. So I have a speed of 2. My cliff check distance is 1.5, and my obstacle distance is 0.2. Player detect was at 5. My pause time was 1. My wait time was 1. Charge time was 2, and charge speed was 4. All right. Now I just have to click on the robot himself, and in this new slot here, where we have our scriptable object spot, I'll just drag it in there. Now the beauty of this is that we can just create different scriptable objects for different enemies, plop them in there, and suddenly this same enemy script can actually work for different versions of this enemy. Let's just test this now. All right, so now when I get into the game, my enemy is patrolling, he detects me, charges, and when he no longer detects me, he goes back to patrol. There we go. All right, things are working just like they were before. We still have to fix that problem, and we want to get some damage actually being dealt here. We'll get there in the next video, but we're well set up for that at this point. Till next time, this is Matt with Nightrun Studio. Cheers.